What's going on, everybody? Thanks for watching. Welcome to another video. Today we're driving a 1985 BMW 635 CSI. This is called the E24-generation 6 Series, and it's basically, it was the first 6 Series that BMW made, and it came out in 1976. It was made until 1989 in a couple of different versions, starting with like a 628i in Europe, and then moving on to the most powerful version was an M6, which is the motorsport version of it, and that car had about 256 horsepower in the US. It was a two-door coupe that replaced the E9, and the E9, is widely considered one of the most beautiful BMWs, out there. The E24 is not quite as pretty or elegant as an E9, but it's a really, really good-looking car. So the first year that the 635 CSI came to the US was 1985, and it had about 215 foot-pounds of torque and about 186 horsepower, so it was pretty good. It was a decent performer. What you could do at the time as well, back in the 80s, you could do what was known as a gray market import, and that was outlawed in the late 80s, early 90s, but 85, which is when this car was imported, there's a tag on the door that states the production date, which was it was early of 1985. March of 85 was when it was made, and then it was federalized at some point that year. So I think the owner, whoever imported it, bought it either slightly used or brand new, and then brought it over and had it federalized. And so what the process was basically back then to get a car in Europe is that you'd buy it in Europe and ship it over here to the US, and then you would have to pay a company to go in and modify it. Basically, they had to change the emission system to pass US emissions, because this car in Europe in 85, it would have been a non-catalyst car, so it didn't have a catalytic converter. And then you had to do safety, basically, regulations had to be put into the car as well. And so that was like a kind of the golden era of gray market cars. You were seeing a lot of these cars coming into the US, a lot of Mercedes, BMWs like this one, Ferrari Boxers, they were not sold here. Porsche 930 Turbos, they were not in the US for a few years in the 80s, and so people were importing those and federalizing them. People did it to save money, basically. You could save 5 or 10 grand over the cost of a car, import it, and then pay to have it federalized. I'm not sure if it was always really a money-saving thing. I think primarily people did it to get something that had better performance than a US spec car, and also looked different, which, like, definitely in the case of an E24, the Euro version, it's way better looking than the US version, in large part due to the bumpers and just the different, things that they had to do to the 635 in the US in order to make it, legal to sell in the US. So the other big difference between a Euro version and a US version would be the engine. It's a non-catalyst engine, and it had a higher compression ratio than the US car, and so it put out more power, about 215 horsepower to the US version's 186, and then torque was up to about 225 foot-pounds of torque. When I decided to buy an E24, I definitely wanted a Euro version, and I looked around for a long time. I luckily found one in New Mexico, but I didn't want a US car. And this one has these nice slim chrome bumpers. It has chrome mirrors. It's got like the chrome on it gives it kind of the look of a classic coupe from like the 70s. The other thing that I really like about the E24 is its racing heritage. I mean, this car, people forget that the E24 was successfully raced by BMW. It won the European Touring Car Championship in 1983. The E30 M3 really gets all the attention from the mid to late 80s, basically, as a race car, and for good reason. I mean, the E30 M3 totally dominated touring car racing, but the E24 was developed into a good race car by BMW. But it went on to win other categories and other classes. It went to Australia, and Australian racers had really good success with racing E24 race cars, and so this car has a genuine racing heritage, which is to me that adds to the appeal of the car. And I'll tell you, those E24 race cars, boy, they sound ridiculous. They sound so good. And they didn't base it on an M6. It's basically just a standard E24 6 Series converted to a race car. So the E24 was designed by Paul Bracq. He was the head of design for BMW in the early 70s, and he designed the E21 3 Series, which was the first 3 Series that came out, and he also designed the 1973 BMW Turbo concept car, which if you look at the interior of that car, there are some sort of similarities with like the dash. There's like the vents are similar in the concept car to the E24. So I think that some of the stuff that he did in that turbo concept car, you know, some of the aesthetics sort of made their way into the E24. It's a very aggressive design, very angular. It has what people refer to as the you know, the shark nose. That's kind of what enthusiasts refer to the E24 as the shark, because of the design of the front end with it's got the really pointy, you know, nose, and then also the grille angles back pretty, you know, dramatically. The glass treatment on it is unusual. It's got a lot of glass. It has these massive rear 3/4 windows, but I think it's aged really well. And this is a car that doesn't look like anything else on the road. I mean, it's a very striking looking car. I'll never forget the first time I saw one. It was when I was a teenager. I was like 18 years old, working at an Italian restaurant, and a customer pulled up in a European Spec E24, and I had just thought it was one of the coolest cars I'd ever seen. And I remember thinking at that point, I was like, I'm going to own a European Spec, you know, E24 at some point. About 7 years ago, I ended up buying this car. It's been a really good car. It's got almost 210,000 miles on it. I bought it with about 180,000, and you know, I've driven it all over the place. It's a touring car, definitely. It's a GT car. It's not a sports car. It's an automatic, and so that definitely dulls the driving, you know, kind of experience of it. So this car shares the chassis with BMW's 5 Series from the same era. So from 1976 until late 1982, the E24 is actually based on the E12 chassis, but they still called it the E24. And then in 1983, when the E28 came out, they switched over and based it on that chassis. And so this one, which is an 85, is based on the E28 chassis and architecture, basically. And so, but this, you know, even though this car's based on the E28, it's longer, it's heavier by a couple hundred pounds. I think this thing weighs 3,300 to 3,400 pounds. It might be a little bit lighter because it's a Euro version, but it's still, you know, at least 100 or 200 pounds heavier than an E28, and so they just don't drive quite as sharply. They're also longer. I mean, this thing's coming up on almost 16 feet long, over 16 feet long in US form with the bigger bumpers, and it's not a small car. It's long, and it's not as rigid as an E28, which is a 4-door sedan, and you know, so it's just not as sharp of a drive. On a back road, it's not. You know, it feels somewhat ponderous, but once you start pushing it hard, it's like a typical BMW. It holds itself together really well when you start pushing it. I have a new set of performance tires on it. I think they're like Federal SS 595, and they have a nice predictable kind of behavior to them. I mean, you can chuck this thing around. It just feels heavy. It's not fast, but it gets up and goes. I mean, it's definitely, you can feel the heft of it. One thing I have to say, it's really easy to get the back end out. I would not want to get this thing out of shape, because I don't know how recoverable it would be, especially with the automatic. But it's got that 80s driving style, where when you push it, it will definitely move around, and it's just, you know, it's actually pretty fun to drive. The steering, which of course is power assisted, has a good heft to it as well. These modern performance tires make a really big difference in how the car drives, I have to say. I've lowered it. It's got Bilstein sport shocks and H&R lowering springs. And currently it's running 17 by 8 and 17 by 10 ESM wheels. And these are basically replicas of AC Schnitzer wheels that you would have found back in the 80s, period correct wheels. The interior is, again, like the exterior. It's a really nice design. I love how it's driver-centric. The center console is angled towards the driver, you know, typical kind of 80s, you know, BMW, you know, aesthetic. That's the way they did cars back then. And it's just it's a really nice place to spend time. When I got it, it had an all tan interior, and it had the comfort seats. I took those out and I put a set of E30 sports seats, which have the correct horizontal stitching, which a European E24 would have had, US spec Sport seats usually have vertical stitching. So it's got these super comfortable sport seats, and they're black. And so when I got the black front seats, I've converted the back seats to black, and I've also have lower areas on the door panels are black, and the center console is black as well. So I've kind of done like a two-tone black and tan color combination, and then I have black and tan cocoa mats. And the last modification that I have in the interior is an M-Tech 1 steering wheel. And all those things combined, this thing is it's a great place to spend time. It's extremely comfortable. Originally this car was Delphin Gray, and I'm going to have it repainted at some point. But in the meantime, I actually have wrapped it in gloss black, and I did the wrap myself. There's a lot of flaws if you look at it closely, but I'm pretty happy with it. I wanted to put the wheels on it, and I didn't want to run the wheels with this really terrible faded paint. It was repainted at some point, and it was totally faded. The values of these things, they're kind of flatlined right now. I feel like the very best ones are kind of creeping up in value, but you can pick up a US Spec 633 or a 635 driving project for $3 to $6 grand, and a Euro Spec car like this, you're going to spend a little bit more. A nice Euro car is going to cost you, the values seem to be like 10 to 15 grand. You can get a pretty good, even a manual European 635 CSI. A car like this one with the automatic and the high miles is probably worth $7,000 or $8,000. All right, you guys, well, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like the content, and we will see you on the next video.